Steve Cohen has bought the franchise for $2.42 billion. And Mets fans get their guy. I mean, as a Mets fan, I mean, you're just really ecstatic. And, after really suffering through the Wilpons and the penny pinching and really just an overall badly run organization, you do get to the World Series in 2015, but this team over the last 5 years, they've had a ton of talent, and it just seems like they keep on falling on their face. And, with all of the different scandals that they've had, you go back to the Bernie Madoff stuff, like 10, 15 years ago, it's just to have a new guy in town. It's really just a breath of fresh air. And a lot of Mets fans, I mean, they're kind of treating Steve Cohen as their savior. And honestly, I don't blame him, because he's, I think, could fix this here for the Mets.
Yeah, I don't think too many people are going to be crying as the Wilpons walk out the door. I think that's going to be something that is accepted pretty widely by most Met fans, who won't be too upset to see a change in ownership. And it's exciting if you're a Mets fan, because you do have so many resources available to you that were not available previously. And in baseball, that's a huge deal, more so than even any other sport, because you do have that inequality in ownership, right? You have a salary cap in the NFL, in the NBA. You can't necessarily gain that competitive advantage the way you can in baseball, where you can outspend a number of teams and get players who are better than the players that are going, to other organizations, because of the financial flexibility that you have, and bring in some elite talents in free agency. So it's not something that you want to ignore. It's a big time move and a big time thing for the New York Mets. Again, the only thing that you got to caution is it's still about the organizational structure. It's still about bringing in young players, because you're not spending on everyone. That's not how this works. Because at some point, because of the luxury tax, it can become counterproductive. You're lining the pockets of your competitors. But at the end of the day, there's no way to spin this too negatively for the Mets, because you have to be confident in not only Cohen coming in, but that he's going to bring in Sandy Alderson, and that they'll get the baseball operations turned in the right direction, because it was certainly in the wrong direction during the tenure of Brodie Van Wagenen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this Mets organization, Cohen is going to come in here and he's going to change a lot of things. And I think the one big thing about the Wilpons is that, everyone talks about how cheap they were, with getting guys and free agents, but they were cheap just running the organization. They had 3 analytics members in their front office, and they were all interns. Like, to me, the way baseball is going, when you only have 3 interns as, in your analytics department, I think that's something that will change. And I think with Steve Cohen, it's international spending, money there. It's analytics in the minor leagues. It's trying to, be able to develop guys. I think that's something that will be an organizational shift. And obviously you can't say it's going to happen, but at least that change and that possibility that, it may happen. And like that the Mets may become, a well-run organization, that's going to make everyone smile. And, if you're a Mets fan and down in Queens, as, if you can build a winner from the ground up, really starting off with, owner, then you have Sandy Alderson. Hopefully he brings in a good GM. It'll be interesting to see if Brodie Van Wagenen does stay on. I mean, as a Mets fan, I think it's time for him to go. But again, I feel like right now, just getting that new fresh start is something that is really huge for the Mets.
Yeah, I think a fresh start is crucial for them, because of some of the pain that has been inflicted on the organization for quite a number of years now, with some of the difficult decision making and some of the players that they've had that have underperformed and not been able to put things together. It's been kind of a weird situation where you look at their roster and say, yeah, I think they have a team that's pretty well built to win, but certain things that you felt like were going to be a certainty have faltered. And the bullpen last year comes to mind, and this year in the starting rotation, where it was something that you sat there and felt really good about. Well, then Syndergaard is Tommy John, and Stroman opts out, and Jacob deGrom is really the only thing that is steady in that rotation, and they don't get much production elsewhere. So they've got a lot to figure out in terms of the roster that they have on right now. I'd like to see them perhaps add a little bit in the starting rotation and figure out and try and shore up that back end. Bullpen is still very much a concern, with Seth Lugo and Gesellman kind of in flux about where they're going to be. I would assume that they would go back into the bullpen, and hopefully the answer is to look for some more starting pitching. And then when you look at the lineup and what are they going to make, what decisions are they going to make on any number of the players that they have in that lineup, position player wise, and just see who they want to retain and where they want to go. But I think the focus needs to be replenishing that farm system as well, because it's pretty bare right now with some of the trades that they made. That Stroman trade was a little bit of a head scratcher for them at the time. Now it makes a little more sense, but you'd also have to sit there and say, this is a guy that we really want to re-sign, because letting him walk doesn't make a ton of sense. And we'll see if the Mets are interested and are able to get something done. But they have a lot of questions, and with those questions are also the flexibility to make decisions, which is good. But they will have a lot of things to answer in a short order here with new ownership and a new organization.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the Mets, I think when you go back to 2015, rewind a little bit, they have this stud starting pitching staff. And then, obviously, if you guys get hurt, the whole thing with Harvey just, it kind of falls apart. But then, last year in 2019, you kind of have this new offensive core that comes up. Pete Alonso bursts on the scene. Jeff McNeil starts hitting good. You have also J.D. Davis comes in and really surprised, really probably the only good move in the Brody Van Wagenen tenure here for the Mets. So you do have a core, and that's what's kind of interesting. The Mets do have, something here to build on. And it just seems like, they have some star players. They have some, all-stars. And throughout these last 5 years, you would think they'd be a little more competitive than, one World Series trip. And then since then, only one trip back to the playoffs, and they got bounced in the first game of the wild card. It's just, to me, this organization, when you have stars, not stars, but at least all-stars in place, like they have a team where if you add a JT Realmuto, if you add, someone maybe Marcus Stroman, Trevor Bauer, I think as guys that come to mind, this team isn't far off from, making a playoff run, I feel.
Yeah, but they have to put it together. That's the one frustrating thing, because you feel like they should be a playoff team right now and they're not. So there are also some questions to be asked about, okay, why are some of the players that we have on our roster not putting it together? And look, they've had a number of issues and in part injuries. I mean, that's not something that you can ignore as well, with the injuries that they had in the rotation. And then that sort of handicapped their bullpen, and the offense didn't hit very well in sort of a 60-game season with runners in scoring position and capitalizing on some of the traffic that they were able to generate on the bases. So there were some things that you feel like maybe they can turn around, but I think that's one of the things that they need to ask themselves, because you're trying to figure out exactly what's going on right now, and this team is just sort of underperformed at times. But yes, you feel like if they can make some additions, they can become a team that can contend. But I'd like to see them get there first before you're talking about, hey, we're real Muto away from being a World Series contender.
Yeah, I think right now with this team and under the Wilpons, under Brody Van Wagenen, they always try to just like band-aid situations. And I really hope that changes. Like, don't, for the catcher situation, don't bring in a Wilson Ramos who, yeah, has had some success hitting, but, obviously isn't this, overall all-star catcher. Same with starting pitching. You bring in Rick Porcello, guys like Michael Wacha. It seems like, yeah, like they have a roster that like could contend, and, you have a few guys fall flat on their face, and then you're kind of just stuck in this mess. And, you make some trades for like Robinson Cano, who, look, that trade to me just makes no sense. I know Edwin Diaz did have a pretty good year, under the radar year here in 2020, but that's the thing with the Mets. I don't want them. I'd rather see them get nobody than just patch up these situations. Even this year at the deadline, they had Todd Frazier and Robinson Chirinos. There's just no reason for it. And like with this Mets team, I would like to see just this organization turn over to, let's not band-aid situations. Let's either, tear it down and start new, or let's try to, get some long-term pieces in there. Maybe it's in the farm system as well. And I think that will do a lot to, change, the mood in the organization, and just not to be like, oh, they're the same old Mets and like stuff like that.
Well, that's the product of the organizational structure that I've been talking about throughout the duration of the show with a bunch of organizations, but it comes back to building that farm system, because you can't pay for the young players. That's not how that works. And you will be more active in the international waters about trying to bring in players that way, but there's also a cap in international bonus pool money where that's more competitive about bringing in the young guys. So That's where they need to start, because that's where good organizations win games. And it's not always necessarily about the homegrown talent coming up and being stars, but providing you with depth. It's when there is an injury that the Mets can look to AAA and say, hey, we've got a young pitcher who can be successful for us for 5 or 6 starts throughout the regular season, or a guy who can come in and be a quality depth piece and sort of platoon in a certain situation where we feel like he can hit left-handed pitching well or right-handed pitching well, and then step into a greater role for 15 to 20 to 30 games if there's an injury that crops up. So that's the most pressing thing for me when you talk about their organization and about building up the farm system, because it's not just they have talent, they have talented players, but they need the depth that goes with that, and to be able to carry them through some of the injuries. And that was something that you knew was bound to change coming from 2019 with how well they pitched in the starting rotation. They stayed remarkably healthy. That was a great season for them health-wise, where they had all 5 guys who were able to just to continue to roll out through 2019. You sat there and said, wow, they've got a great rotation. Well, things changed in 2020 when they had Syndergaard get hurt, and then you have Stroman opt out. So there are certain things from an organizational perspective that they need to get corrected and need to build up. And that's the thing. And the most frustrating thing for me with them, because that's a farm system that should look that way when you are the Yankees or the Rays or the Dodgers, when you are winning a World Series, losing in the playoffs, or 2 wins away from winning a World Series. That's not a team that misses the playoffs when 16 teams are in.
Yeah, I mean, 2 points I want to make. One, that starting pitching staff back in 2019, they were electric, and the Mets still missed the playoffs. So that's something that you have to go back to. Obviously, that had a lot to do with the bullpen just completely floundering in huge situations. And, look, that team was, fun to watch as a Mets fan, but they didn't make the playoffs. They didn't really do anything. They didn't really make much noise. And I think in this 2020 season, you knew replacing Zach Wheeler with Rick Porcello and Michael Wacha wasn't going to work. And I think a lot of it has to do, as you were saying, with depth. And that goes into my second point, which really with this Mets team and under the Wilpons, what the Mets were trying to do is let's get to like the trade deadline and just be like right around in it. And then if we need to make that big splash and actually spend some money, then we can do it there. And it's only like a 2-month period that we have to pay these guys to try to make it big. It worked in 2015. They were kind of 500. Then you bring in a guy like Yoenis Cespedes. He's, that spark plug for your team, and they go to the World Series. That's great. You tried again in 2016 with Jay Bruce. It doesn't work really. I mean, they make the wild card game, but it wasn't, he wasn't good as a Met. And then they tried again with Stroman last year, and it just doesn't work. And that's something that's not a sustainable way of, winning baseball games of, let's just be like barely in it and good enough to the trade deadline and try to get our stars there. You have to build up your stars through this farm system, in the off season, get some free agents as well. That's how good organizations do it. Not let's just be good enough so we can get to 2 months before the season and then try to make a run at it.
You can't do that because you won't have any farm system left to develop.
Exactly.
Because you're sitting there and making those trades and trying to get Yoenis Cespedes, and you're giving up a king's ransom for the star that you don't want to pay for the entire season. And I don't disagree with you that money plays a factor here. And you talked about Band-Aids. Well, that's part of it. They need to provide Band-Aids. They need to go out and sign Michael Wacha and Rick Porcello because they weren't willing to spend on, say, not necessarily Garrett Cole, that type of commitment, but Hyun-Jin Ryu, a guy who was really good with the Dodgers last year, goes to Toronto for $20 million a year, or some of the more reasonable contracts that were given to certain starting pitchers that really could have helped the Mets out, in addition to just the Band-Aid of Wacha and Porcello. So they're all tied together. It does go hand in hand, but at the end of the day, that's the thing that needs to change. I think you did nail that, Andrew, about you got to put your organization in place. It's not about making those trades at the trade deadline, because when you operate in that way, you are really putting yourself at a deficiency from a trade, from an organizational and from a prospect pool standpoint, because you can't really play it in between. You need to declare and decide, and that's, to me, been one of the biggest issues with the Mets these last couple of years. You have to declare and decide which way you're going to run your organization. You can't play it you can't try and say we're going to build through the draft and operate like the Rays, and we're going to just straight go young players, team control, low payroll, and then screw it all up by trying to play and act like you're the Yankees halfway through the season and make those big trades. It doesn't work that way. You need to, the Rays are always committed. When do you see the Rays make a big time mid-season acquisition? Never, because it's all about the prospects that they accumulate. Cleveland doesn't do it in that same way unless they're drawing from a surplus to think about 2 or 3 years from now and save money. These well-run, low-budget organizations. Whereas you look at the Mets, who have played it in between the last couple of years, you can't win that way because they don't have the organization, they don't have the prospects, they don't have the young players. They've held on to a few, but not enough of them that they have given away to try and act like they are making the big play, act like they're trading and they're going to contend by bringing in Yoenis Cespedes and those type of contracts and those type of players. Jay Bruce, as you mentioned as well. You can't play it in between. I think the Mets are now going to be that big organization that will spend, so that's going to be the change. But again, it was the organization. It was never, to me, the problem was never, oh, they won't spend any money, is that they want to act like they're going to spend money and then not do it and screw it up about, okay, what type of organization are we actually?
And I think that's a perfect way to characterize it because, you go back 2 years ago when the Mets hired Brody Van Wagenen, and the reason they hired him is because he would do just as you said. He would just be like, make those, oh, let's just make one move that's really big, but let's not go all in. The Mets could have hired Chaim Bloom, a guy from the Rays, goes to the Red Sox, and he was a guy that wanted to tear everything down per reports. He wanted to really, trade a lot of guys, really start from the beginning, and the Wilpons didn't want to do it. And the Mets would probably be in a completely different situation, today if Bloom was running the team, and who knows what would have happened. But the reason that the Mets were in that situation is because look, the Wilpons needed the money, and they felt like, look, this is the most cost-effective way. Let's not even think about the future because we don't care. And that was something that's how the organization was characterized. And now I feel like with Steve Cohen, especially now, you're going to breathe some new life here into this team. And again, even him coming in this year, like he didn't take on those big losses like other MLB teams did. I do think that's really big. And even if he doesn't go all in on one guy this year, if he just builds it the right way, I think 5 years down the line, the Mets fans will be very, very happy.
Yeah, I think they will if he builds it the right way, because then you're going to be talking about a team that's a consistent winner, and that's something that I think a lot of Mets fans, it's music to your ears about trying to get that thing in place. And it's going to be a challenge. There's no doubt about it. There's going to be a learning curve. They're going to have to figure out exactly the way they want to do. But one of the most important things, and I think the most productive thing, this is the last thing I'll sort of get at with this, is that the Mets finally have a direction and an identity as an organization. And that's the most positive thing, because now that you are a team that can spend with the best of them, and that's how we're going to operate. It is no longer, hey, are we in between? Are we a team that needs to build on a low budget, or a team that's going to try and make big splashy moves to contend and say, look at me, we spend money? The Mets are the latter, and they've now made that clear with new ownership and Steve Cohen saying he's willing to take losses in the first couple of years to make sure that his team is competitive. They have a direction. Everyone is pulling in the same direction. They know what they are, and I think that is one of the most important things for success.